I just bought another watch. I said I wasn't going to. I always say I'm not going to, and yet I did. And again, it's not for me, it's for my damn mother. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. More on them later. And my friend, Carl Cohen, is back here because he was the dealer that sold me this beautiful Cartier Tortue. So this is a Cartier Tortue with all factory diamonds, right? Dial, case, and crown.
Correct.
Right? And this is an interesting watch for a lot of reasons. When I saw it last night, I texted Carl immediately and bought it. And why I think it's interesting, and we'll get more into this a little bit later, why I think it's interesting is because I think it represents, and what's the era on this watch, Carl?
That's a really good question. I've found differing reports or views, as you do find with some Cartier.
Sure.
So I'm not beholden to this because, quite frankly, I'm not the expert. I know a lot.
It's a bit of a mystery, yeah.
But I've seen some people call it late 70s into the 80s.
Yes, okay, because we have a mechanical movement, not cork.
Mechanical. Right. If you look at the style of the bracelet as well as the buckle, it certainly gives you some clues with the hallmarks and stamping and so forth.
Look at the 18 karat stamp there. That's such a decisive vintage,
and you can also see with the hallmarks and then the numbers on the back.
Yeah. Fabulous. So, oh yes, you're right. The signature as well. How beautiful, huh? So we're sitting down with obviously this Cartier that I had just purchased and a whole bunch of other watches. Today's conversation on YouTube is about this Cartier, and this is going to be a long discussion about the brand, but we're going to do a second half of this discussion that will be available on Patreon. So go sign up for extra content over on the Zero. The link is down below, where we're going to go into some amazing pieces here from this white gold, right? Frank Muller to, I mean, this incredible Baignoire by Chopard, a really unusual, unusual, I think a collectible, right? Cartier Basculant in mechanical, and then this bizarre Monaco in solid gold. So much wild stuff that you brought here. So this is it's gonna be a great episode over on the Zero. When I saw this watch, obviously, to me, it represented, an era of Cartier that was. I mean, it's so different than it is now, right? I mean, Cartier was producing, fewer watches objectively. They weren't as large of a company, but also some really interesting low production models that, you'd be hard pressed to find, not find another, but you'd be hard pressed to gather a room full of them. Whereas today in Cartier, everything is pretty publicized and over-publicized even, and while the watches can be fabulous in many cases, still there are so many that rarity is not really a question.
Right.
Whereas back in this era, there were weird things, there were rare things, and there are things to kind of sink your teeth into on a historical level and enjoy.
Yeah, and I think it sort of harkens to a bygone era, but it's also special, right? Because we don't have the luxury to go into a dealer, whether it's Cartier or another brand now, and have an experience like someone else had. Granted, we have an interesting experience, but you used to be able to go into a Cartier store. There weren't really boutiques then. And there was discovery, right? Because watches were introduced every year and periodically, but it wasn't this, everyone's, trying to break into the website to be the first to report what's coming out at Watch and Wonders or previously Basel World. It was like you could show up at Cartier and see something you'd never seen before and something that everyone wasn't talking about, and you were just drawn to this for all the reasons you mentioned. And it was extremely cool because there was this thing you'd never seen and maybe would never see again.
And that's the operative, right? That's the other variable. Maybe you'd never see it again. I've seen diamond Tortues. They still make, or they have made, but that's an unusual watch. I'd put that in the category of, definitely not common, right? I mean, it's tough to, once you use words like rare or things like that, but certainly not common, right? Certainly not common. I thought that was cool. And I love stones, right? And you and I have a mutual appreciation for stones. But so tell me now about how Cartier was structured in the era, right? So you had Paris, London, and New York.
Right. New York's sort of the bastard, I think, now, for lack of a better word. It's sort of seen, if you're to tier it, at the bottom. There are a lot of people who don't care for Cartier New York. Because there was a lot of mass production, there was subcontracting and so forth. There are some interesting pieces, of course. You get some of the step cases that are popular, but you also had co-branding, whether it was publicized or sort of covert, where Cartier would contract different companies in the US but elsewhere to manufacture cases and movements. So it's a little less interesting to the majority of the market. Some people find it very interesting that Concord made this case or movement, or Universal Genève did, or Boucher-Giraud, and so forth. But that was also how the market was then. But then you have Cartier Paris, which is the largest segment, the best known, and arguably the most coveted on a mass scale. And then you have Cartier London, which is the hot space right now. And that's because they were handcrafted, special, and most pieces were unique. And it was a different level of work and commitment that went into any given watch. So it was just interesting and different than many other brands of that time as well.
The style of the dials were different.
Yeah.
The London dials are so easily, distinguishable from their French or an American brother and brethren. So it's kind of interesting,
Right.
And by the way, on the whole handmade case thing, that's actually not something that gets a lot of talk about. And obviously, as always, I'll be completely transparent. I actually didn't, I knew the watches were handmade, knew that, but it didn't really register in a meaningful way until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when I actually saw photos of multiple London crashes beside each other.
Sure.
I think that photo was actually from Eric Koo. And I remember seeing it and being like, oh wait, so not only are they handmade, and inherently not everything that's handmade has to be a little bit different, because you can't,
Right.
but like the differences are like, they're big, like they're really different.
Sure.
Every London crash is rather different. We don't get that anymore.
No.
It's just, you're never gonna see.
You just get like 100 now custom crashes that suck.
Well, that's true, Santos that suck, Cloche that suck. Everyone's, these custom Cartier,
Asymmetric.
by and large, they're awful. They're the worst, Why do you think that's happened? Why do you think that Cartier now is opening up to all of this custom work? And why do you think they're green lighting so many ugly watches?
I think it's in part because you look at the parent company and who they are, and it's a luxury conglomerate, and they know the market. And I think Cartier sees an opportunity, much like other brands do, where it's like, hey, there's this huge potential in market. We don't want to mass market. We want to make it sort of niche and quote unquote special. So we do iterations of this historical piece and that historical piece, and oh, by the way, we'll have some for New York, we'll have some for London, we'll have some for Paris. And if you're really special, or you just buy a lot of our jewelry, you can get something made, which like turns into a pissing contest.
Well, it's exactly
who can make the coolest iteration of this watch, or like the ugliest.
Oh, the ugliest,
They're bad. Like I see 99% of them and I'm like, okay, cool. I don't want that. And that's not because I can't get it. It's because I literally don't want that.
It's hideous. A lot of these watches are hideous, which by the way is not just like us or me trying to be nasty. It's interesting historically because so many of these brands wouldn't manufacture something that they didn't think was attractive for a very long time, right? The brands were... The custom pieces that we see from history, clearly they were of a different level of thoughtfulness and a different level of detail.
I think
they weren't just outrageous for the sake of being outrageous, is my point, I suppose. As promised, today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I have been using Squarespace for 10 years now. I actually celebrated the 10 years anniversary of Theo and Harris last Saturday. I've been using Squarespace for 10 years now. At the beginning, it actually wasn't the first company that I had tried out. There are other competing companies. It was really bad. It was a really bad experience, and I really had no money. I had no option to go hire webmasters or anything like that. And then someone, when I was discouraged, recommend I take a look at Squarespace, and I did. Now we're going back 10 years. So Squarespace was, it was a great company. It was fabulous. I wouldn't be with them today if they weren't. But it was nothing compared to what it is now, right?
Sure.
The tools that Squarespace offers, from their SEO tools, which are huge, to what they call their fluid engine system, which allows you, the user, to drag and drop different elements from your site very easy to make it, custom to you. The big thing though is their template system, right? The fact that you're able to look through this large collection of different, templates, website templates that are, again, easy to manipulate, easy to make yours, but just beautiful from the onset, right? Fonts, spacing, color. It gives you the ability to not just make a website, make a brand. right? Now, you've got invoicing systems, which we use all the time, which make everything so much easier. I am a huge advocate for Squarespace, not only for people that, maybe are starting a website and should take a look, but even more so, everyone out there with a site like you using Shopify, head on over to Squarespace and take a look, poke around, make an account, and if you're not blown away by the experience and it's not better than where you are, I'd be very, very surprised. Squarespace is that good. And we should always be trying to better ourselves in our businesses. So head on over to Squarespace, use the code Theo Harris for 10% off your website or domain. And that's it. Thank you to Squarespace.
We've seen a lot more piece unique from various brands sort of pop up over the last few years, which are actually like very interesting, right? Because it seems like there was a lot of thought and care that went into them, a lot of time to make them, and it was like made for a specific special or important person.
Yes.
It wasn't just, oh, they've got a shitload of money, like,
yeah,
we should do right by them.
I think one of the interesting and really one of my first exposures to custom work was, I guess, in one of the talking watches when John Mayer was talking about with luminous hands, and how he was talking about how Patek, I believe, didn't want to do it at the time, but he had made the argument that if I were to wear it on stage, I would need the luminous.
Sure.
Now, of course, that's ridiculous. You don't need to wear the 5970 on stage, but assuming they did make an exception, that actually kind of is an interesting case study, right? It's like, okay, well, we do think this is a bit of a perversion of the meaning of the watch, but we get where you're coming from, and maybe we'll make the exception because we get it.
Right, and it's like there is some inherent utility to it, even though, like, why would you ever wear this watch on stage?
But that's kind of interesting too, right? I mean, or inspiring, not inspiring, that's a dramatic word, but within the context of watch ownership, that you take something so precious and so amazing and actually wear it, right? I know so many people with these huge watch collections that never wear them. I mean, never. I mean, I'm sure you know the same people. I mean, there's so many incredible watches that never get worn.
Right.
Never get worn. And that's a kind of a great shame, right?
It is, and I think, like, as you see more of that and as tastes and interests change, at least for me, I've been sort of reshaping my collection and eliminating some, and like, I find that some watches that I think I wouldn't enjoy are just really fun to wear,
for sure.
Or some just basic, simple stuff. I'm like, this is one of my favorite watches to wear.
For sure,
Like,
and that kind of brings the conversation really full circle to the watch that we're talking about today, which is this Tortue with factory, right? Pavic
all
dial,
factory dial, logs, bezel,
and crown. Right?
Yeah.
And obviously, this takes us back to a time in Cartier that. Lower production pieces were a little bit more normal. That happened, right?
Sure.
Whereas today it's not as common. And if they do happen, they're really big news over every publication. I think that when Cartier was manufacturing oddball pieces 20 or 30 years ago, no one knew. I mean, it wasn't on the news,
right?
Whereas today, what are your thoughts on that evolution? Does it make it less special?
It does, but I think it's sort of unfair to take that in a vacuum, right? Because so much has changed and it's a byproduct of the market, social media and everything else. But for sure, to me, it's more special knowing that, like, this was made for Christian or this was made for Carl, and it wasn't made because famous people online were wearing it, or you saw, Tyler, the Creator, or whomever wearing this, and then you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, watches have become forefront of fashion, I think. And certainly the evolution we're seeing now, where there's a big move towards watches that are more, jewelry, so to speak, and that are more of a statement piece. It could be subtle, but a deviation I think we're starting to see from the classic professional models in Rolex or sport models with a number of brands, where people are looking for something that's elegant, it's subtle, and just different.
Well, and that's really kind of given way to the, repopularization of gem set, which I think is a really good example, right? And the Rolex Daytona Rainbow kind of paved the way there. It's one of the first gem set watches. And when I say modern history, I mean the last couple of years, and which was really big growth years for watches, really since COVID. That was one of the trailblazer pieces, I think. And now folks are looking at all different brands. Boucheron is actually a good example of, right, every once in a while you see Boucheron as well, you see Gemset. Gemset watches are hot. I don't own any Gemset watches. I would love to own something with sapphires or with emeralds or with rubies. Unfortunately, I haven't been lucky enough to find anything that's affordable or like represents great value. And I also can't afford the, crazy pieces that are out there. So I've been in this weird limbo, which is a bit of a shame because I have always, even, you sound like a jerk, but even before it was cool, I totally would have loved the sapphire cased watch. I mean, absolutely would have loved that. Now everyone wants to be Liberace's.
Right. Or even just like stuff like Piaget's done, right, with the Warhols and so forth, which are like really cool, and it goes back to a traditional classic design.
Certainly.
And there's that interest there.
And then moving on to another element here of this piece that I find really interesting, and I don't know if we've discussed this, but I think that the Tortue as a collection is really interesting. Really interesting design. At its inception, these watches, I mean, the shape hasn't changed much, but the profile really has.
Right.
As they've gotten larger, the men's versions have really domed. I mean, completely.
Right.
So if we look back into history, that was not the design. It was a flat,
sort of chic,
this is very
understated. But yeah, now the more modern Tortues, and I've been,
be it chrono or time only,
fortunate to have a number of them, but they are thick. They're big on the wrist. And yeah, even the time only, whether it's, in a precious metal or precious metal with a diamond bezel, it's ostentatious, which is like counter to this watch you picked up that's subtle, it's elegant, it's smart.
It's ridiculous, right, with the pavé, but look at this is original Tortue style. I would say that this shape is true to the original design. Right. I find interesting.
Right. I mean, if you were to put it side by side with something more modern, it's just like,
yeah, you sort of, I mean, you could obviously see, you're like, oh yeah, sure, same collection because they have the same case, but then if you flip it, it's nothing to say.
Right.
There's nothing, they share nothing in common apart from, maybe a last name, it seems. This obviously falls into a, kind of category of cocktail watch, right? I bought this for my mom, not for myself. And that's
a shame. I thought it would look good on you.
I know, yeah. That kind of brings us into, that portion of the conversation. There are things that, and I will wear this watch, there's no doubt about it. But there are things that, you can love and admire and yet still know, like, okay, I know my mom will get more use out of this watch than I will.
Sure.
I do know that for sure. In part by virtue of the fact that she has fewer watches than I do, so I'm always juggling, and my mom has like 3 watches, so she'll wear this. It'll get wear, and it's also a way for kind of me to get that out of my system, that itch. I could scratch that itch of beautiful. I think in the ladies category, they're always less expensive. They're always more affordable as a ladies collection than it would be in men's. And I think it's an interesting watch. I mean, I think
it's very cool.
I think it's just really, really cool.
You're making me regret it now.
No, I know. Another cool one.
You just sold me on I got to go find Jen and get my watches back.
Exactly. I mean, as I've mentioned here before on the channel, I bought. And again, everyone knows it. I'm Theo and Harris. I own a retail store. This is not a secret. And yet I publicly say all the time that I've bought so many watches. My mom's watches are from Carl. That's just the truth. To be mealy-mouthed about that would be absolutely ridiculous. Bought my green date from you. I bought this.
Your white gold GMT.
I've been friends with Carl for many years, and it's just a good dealer. So it's just been really, really great to continue to fill the family kind of little watch box with great stuff from you. So this is cool. Any final thoughts on this Cartier or just the conversation?
No, I just think it's interesting, as a brand evolution, as the market and taste change, and I'm curious to see where things will go. I mean, you can see Cartier now starting to definitely move towards some smaller things from the catalog, whether it was I think reissue of a Tank Americain, which they did, as well as a sort of variation of the Tank Louis that's like a petite or mini, which is like interesting, but also, and I think I fall victim to the fact that I buy vintage and I sort of know what it costs, but you see these brand new watches and I'm like, that's a lot of money for what it is.
Oh, they're very expensive. They're very expensive. I mean, you even look at a modern crash, which you can't even get an allocation for, but if you were, it's a lot of money. It's nearing $40,000, I think, it's on what level is, like, why is that so much more expensive than a Patek Calatrava? I don't see on an objective measure why it's more expensive.
Or even like just the rose gold Tank Louis, right?
That's true, yeah.
On leather, and it's what, like 14,000? It's like, I'm like, it's cool, but people are buying it.
I guess so.
I think. I don't know.
You definitely see a lot of the more affordable Cartier for sale.
Yeah.
And that's, back to the conversation you said before about kind of them forcing you to build up a spend history in order to get an allocation. And in order to do that, you need something that people want an allocation of. That's it's part of it. Otherwise, why do the journey? I think that's very interesting. And I think all brands would like to do that. But it's, how long, as I've said before with other brands, how long is that journey? How dedicated will people be to get to the end of the road and get their allocation?
It's shortening. I think you can see it for sure with Rolex, which I buy and sell a lot of, but it's happening and it's good.
Yeah, I agree.
It's definitit happening.
And then that leaves really for the people that actually want the watch. If you want it,
no one actually wants it.
It's funny. I mean, it is funny how many of the people that are on the line actually want the watch when you can get it. Because by the time you get it, for a lot of people, it's when you can kind of get them.
Right. Or you get it and you're like, oh.
And there have been watches that I'm very glad that I don't own that I wanted to at one point.
Yeah.
It's definitely happened. And it's, and I'm weirdly sentimental with watches, so I probably wouldn't have sold them,
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing. I mean, being told no sometimes it's good and it's healthy. It's literally good for your system, I think, to have to cope and be a man about it, as opposed to kind of being a baby and sorry, but bringing in really wild gifts to ADs, or I've heard of people taking them on vacation. I mean, I've told you this. I mean, I know people that have sent ADs on vacations to really expensive Caribbean islands.
They get it?
To be honest, I think probably at some point, I'm sure, but come on. I mean,
it's just people want to be down.
But think about the mental health.
No, it's awful.
You just can't hear no. I mean,
I worked retail, but I remember working, there was never this terminology. Everyone, my AD, my SA, this and that. And I'm like, you put them on a pedestal, no offense to them, but by the way, the vast majority of them don't know anything.
That's right. And basically, and I think it's, I'm sure it's a much more important thought experiment in another space, but anyone you give tremendous deference to will assume an ego almost immediately. On a Wednesday, you got nothing, something changes, they get the deference. By Friday, they are king. And we created a class of kings, kind of key holders, It's weird. It's really weird behavior.
Key holder, gatekeeper, whatever.
Gatekeeper.
Quick anecdote. I was on vacation for my mom's birthday. We were down in the Bahamas last week, and I went into the Rolex.
Tan.
This is a tan?
That's a Jewish tan.
Yeah. The Jewish guy in an Italian talk watches.
Exactly.
But anyway, everything's exhibition only, blah, blah, blah. I'm just chatting them up. My mom's talking because she's worked retail, and, the same spiel. Nothing available, but then they say we get stuff during the week at 3 or 4 o'clock, and you come in. If we get a duplicate, then we sell what's in the case, blah, blah, blah. Like whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm chatting. I'm like, do they still do the John Bull finish? Which, for those who don't know, John Bull is a longtime dealer in the Bahamas who has a number.
Remember this.
They have a number of stores and they're known because they used to do what's known as a John Bull finish, which is this weird sort of almost like barked moire type finish on the watches that you see a lot on Submariners, whether it's steel or steel and gold or occasionally gold.
Yeah.
And it was something that they did. And for a long time, it was sort of like, it's a John Bull, let's charge X% less because no one wants this polish or finish, or it's a pain in the ass to remove. Much like other things, there are opportunists who have made a market out of it lately. So you'll see some prominent dealers selling it and promoting it, which is fine. Yeah. But I asked them about it, and the woman working had no idea. Yeah. Never heard of it. So she asked the other guy who's working. He's like, no, no, that's not true. They never did this. He's like, you're wrong. There's no such thing. And I'm like,
I'm making it up.
I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. But I think it's important, even though you're selling a product that you could basically give away to whoever lined up, like, you need to know something about the brand you're selling, as well as the history of the company you work for, because it's hugely important in sort of the overall history, but also in selling something. So I found that really off-putting.
I agree. I would say, you know, just similarly, it's a little different, but I would say one of the weirdest, you know, sales experiences I'd ever had, or weirdest moments with an AD that I ever had, was I was at a Rolex store. Actually, it's no longer a Rolex authorized dealer, so you know, there you go.
Local here?
Well, yeah, you can imagine at a mall, at a local mall, right? And the sales associate was, I'm speaking to him, and he was showing me different Rolexes, and he was talking about the Sky Dweller. And now this is before Rolex offered the Sky Dweller in stainless steel.
Interesting.
Okay, so of course at the time, you know, it wasn't offered in stainless steel; it was only precious metal. So there is something to be said about that. You know, this is one of the most, is really one of the more precious Rolexes. Like the Day-Date, it's only offered in precious
metal. It's heavy.
Right. Okay. If you see another one on the wrist, right? But the claim was, like the Day-Date, this will never be made in stainless steel. At the time, I was like, well, you don't know that,
no,
right? And now I wasn't buying a Sky Dweller, so it was kind of irrelevant. But just as a consumer, I was like, what a weird thing. I can very logically see a consumer journey where someone that doesn't know that much about Rolex goes into a store, looks at a couple of Rolexes, sees the Day-Date and the Sky Dweller, chooses between them specifically because they want the only Rolexes that are offered only in precious metal and will forever. And you did just lie. You did. You made an assertion about the future that actually was predictably untrue. It really exposed your own ignorance as a dealer. And that guy ended up actually getting fired before they lost their AD. So I guess it all, you know, I remember hearing that and being like, wow, like I definitely know people that would have bought that and then bought the watch.
Right.
Like for sure. You know, oh wait, that's the Big Daddy watch? Cool, I'm gonna have that one because it'll never come in stainless steel.
Right. And I think, as you said, and I still see it today, and it sort of annoys me as you see people talk about releases like you're speaking of a watch in precious metal. The playbook, so to speak, has always been you introduce a new model in the precious metal, a few years pass, you go two-tone, then you go stainless steel. So this person saying that definitely
just
showed ignorance. I do know at the time, though, that the movement was very, very expensive. So there was talk that perhaps we wouldn't do it right away because this movement costs so much to manufacture that it's not profitable.
It would have to be such an expensive steel watch, right?
And mind you, we're not talking like 50% margins. Those of you who don't know, these brands have very, very good margins.
Good margins, believe it or not.
So that's how they afford all these fancy videos you see and so forth. But I've seen it more recently. A good example is the VC222. Which came out in the reissue in gold, and then I think they just did it.
But everyone knew it.
Steel and blue, and people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they did that! So unexpected." It's like bullshit.
Well, it's not unexpected.
You either like haven't put in the work and studied and learned how models evolve, or you're just a total pawn for them, which is, let's be honest.
Yeah, it's very often. Yeah, very frequently. Yeah, it's, you know, and I thought that was an interesting experiment too. I mean, the 222 and you know, the success of the 222 in yellow gold, I thought was interesting because it's a really expensive yellow gold time only watch. It's really expensive. It is, how much is a 5711R before it was discontinued? It was like 55,000 or something. So 55,000 versus, I believe the 222 got up to 70.
Yeah.
Okay, huge difference, right? I mean, you can get a Day-Date at 42 or whatever a Day-Date costs. This is a really expensive solid gold time-only watch. And yet people really did buy into it. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that was nice. Coming from someone who has always been a public advocate for precious metal. As much as I'm an advocate for precious metal because I like it, I also hate how crazy people went for steel. Because I looked at that as kind of like just a like kind of joke. It is. Like people were spending $35,000 on a Daytona. I thought that was ridiculous in stainless steel. I just think it's wild, you know? So I was always about, okay, let's go back into precious. That's why I mean, when I bought this was not that much more expensive than the steel.
No, it was what, high 20s or something?
And that's why I bought over the stainless.
You're even seeing it now with some of the professional or sport models and Rolex and other brands, right?
Yeah.
I'm seeing like 90s or 2000s gold subs in the low 20s. While like still a stainless is more than 50% of that, or the current models in ceramic, like whatever, who cares? Like people are still trying to charge people 14 or 15,000.
Amazing.
I'm like, I can spend a little more, maybe not a little, but a few thousand more, and I can get a precious metal version.
And I think it's just because the watch media has worked so hard to convince people that stainless steel is cool. It's cool.
Yeah,
it's a cool guy. I mean, it's cool. It's the equivalent of cashmere joggers, which became like a really big thing. It's like you want to communicate that you're rich, but also that you don't take yourself too seriously, man. You're cool.
And you want
rich, and you're a banker.
You want to say stealth wealth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or quiet luxury.
Exactly.
Like,
so I'm like, no. Let's wear gold. Let's just stay with the gold thing, guys. I just don't like that whole. I don't know. It's just never my thing. It was never my jam.
Right. And I think like one of the rare exceptions, or the exception, but it's in vintage, is you look at Patek, right?
Yes.
Because steel watches are incredibly difficult to find in vintage, and many times are more valuable than the precious counterpart.
By virtue of their rarity. Right. They're just so rare.
Right.
Yeah.
And you see it in some Rolex too, but it's like you see a Patek in a white metal, and immediately those who collect and are in the know, if they don't know, say, is that steel?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, and in Patek, that delta became so much. I mean, for the 3940 is a good example. Not that long ago, you had 3940s at 35 grand, and in a white metal, it was double.
Right.
And it was like, okay, wait, it's the same watch.
Right.
And, is this delta only to be explained by watch media? I mean, I would say that watch media made up for, let's say, I'm making up a number, but something like 80% of that delta.
Right.
Both the inflation, really more so the inflation of the white metal rather than, anything else. But anyway, we could talk about this for hours. But thank you for the Cartier. My mother looks forward to this. She's in Florida now, but when she gets back, she'll start wearing it. And she was like, well, it's so beautiful. When am I going to wear it, though? It's, I was like, all the time.
Right. Like just whenever you want.
Wear it whenever. It's a cocktail watch. Just wear it whenever. Yeah. Plus, my mom's always drinking. No, I'm just kidding. But that's it, Carl.
Cool. Thanks
so much.
A pleasure.
And we'll see you. I'll see you soon. Go over to Carl's site, right? CMT Watches.
Verlet. CMT, whatever. Who cares? Shop with Christian. I'll sell to Christian. You can buy from him because I don't really want to interact with people.
Perfectly symbiotic relationship we've got here. But that's it. See you guys soon.